Four different jurisdictions reached for accountability on the same week. Pennsylvania filed suit over an AI system that handed out a fake medical license number across 45,500 conversations. Five major book publishers dragged Meta into court, alleging that Llama was trained on pirated books and reproduces them word for word. Apple agreed to pay $250 million for advertising a Siri that, in the words of the complaint, did not exist at the time, do not exist now, and will not exist for 2 or more years. And the federal government, the same federal government that less than a year ago published an AI action plan promising hands-off regulation, announced that it would start pre-testing frontier AI models from Google, Microsoft, and XAI before they ship. That's one day. So let me show you what's actually happening underneath all of this. I want to start with the Commerce Department because this one is structural. Less than a year ago, the federal AI policy posture was deregulation, federal preemption of state AI laws, and a deliberately hands-off stance toward frontier model development. That was the action plan. But yesterday, the Commerce Department announced that it will conduct pre-deployment testing of frontier models from Google, Microsoft, and XAI before those models reach general availability. Same administration, opposite direction, inside 12 months. So you might be thinking, okay, an announcement is just an announcement. The labs will negotiate it down to nothing. This is theater. And that's a fair instinct, yes. But here's what makes it actually different. The companies in question are the ones that did agree to the all lawful purposes terms when the Pentagon offered them back in February. The lab that refused, Anthropic, was designated a supply chain risk. So the federal government is now positioning itself to pre-test models from companies that it already classified as cooperative partners. That's an audit checkpoint that's being built into the procurement architecture. And here's why I want you to stay on this. Pre-deployment review is becoming the federal default. Once the review queue exists, once Commerce has hired evaluators, once the benchmark documents exist as federal artifacts, those persist. They persist into the next administration. They persist regardless of which lab is being evaluated next quarter. The criteria the evaluator uses in 2027 will be drafted from the criteria written this summer. So what this is actually pointing at is the assumption underwriting the original action plan that frontier AI capability could be left to bilateral commercial arrangement between labs and customers, with federal review arriving years later, if at all, collapsed from inside the institution that authored it. This reversal is the federal government acknowledging that the speed and consequence of frontier deployment exceeded the regulatory architecture designed to oversee it. So let's picture the evaluator in the Commerce review queue next quarter. She's reading a model card against benchmarks that did not exist as a federal artifact 6 months ago. The lab engineer on the other side of that exchange is working from a release checklist that her predecessors did not have to fill out. Neither of those people existed in their current roles a year ago. The audit layer that original action plan declined to build is being drafted now under operational pressure rather than legislative debate, which means the criteria will be technical and recoverable and not rhetorical. And that's the kind of infrastructure that actually does survive an election. All right, shifting away to a story that I want to spend real time on because it tells you what's happening to the substrate underneath all the AI capital that we have been tracking here. NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, issued a level 3 alert on Monday. That's its highest alert. The level 3 was about an inverter-based renewable resource tripping offline. This one is about data centers, specifically AI training and crypto mining workloads, unexpectedly disconnecting from the grid or oscillating their demand fast enough to threaten bulk power reliability. Let me put that in plain terms. A 500 megawatt training cluster is roughly the load of a small city. When that load suddenly drops or pulses up and down rapidly, the grid has to absorb that swing. The problem is, the planning models that the grid was built on assume loads that behave like cities, not like compute. Cities don't decide to drop 500 megawatts in a second because a training run hit a checkpoint. NERC issued a level 2 warning on this last year. The response, in NERC's own words, was that the grid entities generally did not have sufficient processes, procedures, or methods to address emerging computational loads, so they escalated. The level 3 alert mandates 7 specific actions. Acknowledgement is due May 11th, and a full response is due on August 3rd. So here's what the 7 actions actually require. Transmission planners now have to collect minimum and maximum consumption data, IT versus cooling ratios, and load behavior characteristics from data center facilities. Transmission operators have to establish commissioning processes with full load and no load testing. Planning coordinators have to revise the trigger definitions for stability limits and reliability assessments. Every one of those is an admission that the existing rules weren't designed for the loads that are being connected now. And every one of those forces information into the public planning record that used to live inside private contracts between a hyperscaler and a single utility. The Citizens Action Coalition's Ben Inskeep, quoted in NERC's coverage, said the instability issues could become quite severe to the point of creating widespread blackouts. That is an institutional voice that doesn't usually speak in those catastrophic terms, saying out loud what the alert signals indirectly. Now here's the deeper read. The architecture being eroded is the bilateral utility contract as the governance layer for hyperscale compute. The assumption that the data center loads could be interconnected on terms negotiated privately between a developer and a single utility, with the bulk power system absorbing whatever behavior resulted. Those contracts assumed that the substrate was inexhaustible and the load behavior was predictable. The 220 gigawatt PJM queue, the Denmark moratorium we covered this last Sunday, the 24% summer peak demand increase that NERC is projecting over 10 years, these are all evidence that this assumption no longer holds. Picture the planning engineer in August reading a commissioning report that includes the ride-through behavior of a 500 megawatt training cluster. Her counterpart in the next region can request that document by name. The substrate stops being a private input the moment its behavior becomes a recoverable artifact. That's what NERC just made happen. The grid is becoming legible to itself on a compressed timeline because the load behavior forced it to. Okay, same week, different layer. The Financial Stability Board, the global regulator that oversees systemic risk to the financial system, published a report flagging that AI infrastructure debt is a category worth watching. Here's a number that's important. AI companies accounted for more than a third of private credit deals in 2025. That's up from 17% over the previous 5 years. So in roughly 12 months, AI doubled its share of one of the fastest growing capital pools in global finance. Private credit is loans that are made outside the banking system. So pension funds, dedicated credit funds, insurers lending directly to companies that can't or won't access public debt markets. It's opaque by design. The borrower only discloses what they want to disclose. The lender prices the risk based only on partial information. That model worked when the borrowers were mid-market industrials and the loan sizes were measured in hundreds of millions. AI infrastructure loans are measured in tens of billions, and the borrower's creditworthiness depends on power supply, data center construction timelines, and demand projections that have all gotten more uncertain in the past 6 months. The FSB names the mechanism specifically. A shortfall in electricity supply could delay or cancel data center projects. AI valuations could correct hard if data center build-out outpaces actual demand. Banks are increasingly exposed because they lend directly to private credit funds, finance riskier portfolios, or lend to companies that are simultaneously borrowing from private credit firms. The Tricolor and First Brands collapses last year cost JP Morgan, Barclays, UBS, and Jefferies real money. Those were automotive companies. The exposure the FSB is flagging is an order of magnitude larger. The architecture being eroded here is information asymmetry as the core feature of private credit. The assumption that lenders could underwrite AI infrastructure debt without the standardized disclosures that public markets require because the borrower's growth would outrun the need for verification. The FSB naming the sector specifically converts that asymmetry from a competitive advantage into a regulatory liability. So now picture the credit analyst at a regional bank in 2027 pricing a data center loan against the FSB's documented exposure framework. Picture the banking supervisor on the other end finally able to see what her bank's lending to private credit funds actually finances. The opacity that made AI infrastructure capital cheap is now the feature that regulators are positioned to require it disclose. There's more on this thread in today's Century Report if you want to follow the full capital architecture. Now, shifting away to the litigation layer, because 4 lawsuits arrived in the same news cycle, and they're describing the same dynamic from 4 different angles. Pennsylvania first. The state attorney general sued Character AI, alleging the platform hosted an AI system that claimed to be a licensed psychiatrist and provided an invalid Pennsylvania medical license number across approximately 45,500 user interactions. 45,500. With a fabricated license number that any licensing board investigator could have checked in 30 seconds. Now, this extends a pattern we've been tracking. 2 weeks ago, the American Medical Association asked Congress for federal safeguards on AI mental health chatbots. Pennsylvania didn't wait. The Pennsylvania filing is now a template, a state attorney general suit against an AI platform for professional impersonation, with logged interactions and a fake credential number sitting in the complaint. Second story here. 5 major book publishers, Macmillan, McGraw-Hill, Elsevier, Hachette, and Cengage, joined author Scott Turow in a class action against Meta. The allegation is that Llama was trained on the copyrighted works pirated from LibGen, Sci-Hub, SciMag, and Anna's archive. And this is the important part. The model reproduces copyrighted text word for word when prompted with brief sentences from the underlying books. Meta's defense in earlier copyright cases has been that AI training is fair use. That defense gets harder when the plaintiffs can demonstrate verbatim reproduction on demand. The publishers have the resources to litigate this through to judgment. The artifacts, the verbatim reproductions, exists as recoverable evidence the moment a plaintiff's lawyer prompts the model. Third story here. Apple agreed to pay $250 million to settle claims that it falsely promoted AI-powered Siri features. The Better Business Bureau's National Advertising Division, not a court, but the industry's own self-regulatory body, concluded that the features were not actually available. The settlement covers approximately 36 million eligible devices. That's the first major financial accountability for AI capability claims that didn't match deployment reality. And the fourth story. California's Energy Commission subpoenaed Golden State Wind over the federal government's $120 million payment to abandon a 2-gigawatt offshore wind lease. State Attorney General investigating federal procurement decisions. New venue, new precedent. Now, what links all of these is a structural detail really worth paying attention to. The verification gap is closing through litigation in jurisdictions that the deployment cycle did not anticipate. Copyright, consumer protection, professional licensing, energy procurement. 4 different bodies of law in 1 week, each producing recoverable evidence. The architecture being eroded is jurisdictional outrun, the assumption that AI deployment could move faster than any single court, attorney general, or licensing board could mobilize. The arithmetic worked when the venues acted alone, but it stops working the week that 4 venues act in parallel. Think about the licensing board investigator in Ohio next quarter, opening the Pennsylvania filing and recognizing he already has the statutory authority. He was just waiting for the template. Picture the publisher litigation counsel in the Meta case, walking into discovery with verbatim reproduction examples that the model produces on demand. Picture the consumer protection attorney in another state entirely, reading the Apple settlement and noticing how the AI capability claim was actually documented as false. Each filing is a recoverable record that the next jurisdiction inherits. The verification capacity the deployment cycle was designed to outrun is the verification capacity that the next deployment cycle gets to start from. Okay, one more from yesterday, and this is a really important one, and then I'll bring all this together. Greg Brockman testified in the Musk versus Altman trial. Under oath, he described an August 2017 meeting at Elon Musk's Hillsborough mansion. Whiskey, Amber Heard serving drinks, Suitskever's painting of a Tesla given as a gift, Musk demanding full control of a for-profit OpenAI. Brockman and Suitskever refused. Musk grabbed the painting and left, threatening to cut funding until Brockman and Suitskever quit. Brockman testified, quote, "I actually thought he was going to hit me, physically attack me." Brockman acknowledged on the stand that his OpenAI stake is currently worth between $20 and $30 billion. He also confirmed he never followed through on a promised $100,000 nonprofit donation. He also confirmed personal investments in Cerebras, CoreWeave, and Helion Energy, three companies that subsequently signed major partnerships with OpenAI. We talked about this yesterday. Now, the surface read of all of this is just gossip. The whiskey, the painting, the disputed donation, $30 billion stake, that's the story that most coverage will run with. But the deeper read on all of this is what's being placed on the public record. Musk versus Altman is functioning as the first public deposition of how the dominant AI lab structure was actually assembled. The court is producing a recoverable record of OpenAI's origin moment that did not exist before the trial began. Whiskey, paintings, threats to walk away all entered into evidence. What's becoming impossible to maintain here is the assumption that AI lab governance can rely on the founder's private representations about mission and intent without independent verification. The verification layer is being assembled now adversarially through discovery, through sworn testimony on the slowest infrastructure available to public accountability, which is a federal trial, months long, but the record persists. Every future lab governance dispute will draft against the precedent that is currently being set in Oakland right now. Closing out for today. The labor doing the verifying differed from the labor that did the deploying in 5 different venues. Commerce evaluators preparing to test models built by labs they don't work for. NERC engineers writing commissioning standards for data centers that their utilities didn't design. The FSB naming a sector its mandate previously didn't reach. 4 state and federal courts reaching for evidence that the deployment cycle was designed to keep opaque. A sworn trial transcript reproducing the origin story of an $852 billion company. The conventional read on all of this is that institutions are slow, the rules haven't caught up, and AI is outrunning governance. That's all true. But that reading assumes a stable governance state is waiting at the end of a catch-up period, but it is not. What's happening is something completely different. What governance is becoming under continuous transformation runs on cadences that the prior era did not have. A level 3 alert mandating 7 actions on a 90-day timeline, not a regulatory rulemaking on a 5-year timeline. A class action with a verbatim reproduction example that the model generates on demand, not a copyright doctrine debate that takes a decade. A federal pre-deployment testing framework drafted under operational pressure, not a legislative process that gets stalled by lobbying. A systemic risk regulator naming a sector by name, not a banking supervisor waiting simply for the next crisis. Each of those is the audit layer being built piece by whoever moves first in their jurisdiction. The Pennsylvania investigator with 45,500 logged interactions. The Publishers Council with verbatim reproductions. The NERC planner with commissioning data. The Commerce evaluator with a model card and a benchmark suite. Now, what this actually means is the verification capacity that the deployment cycle was designed to outrun is becoming the verification capacity the next deployment cycle starts from. The Pennsylvania complaint is now a template for 49 other states. The NERC commissioning document is now a request that the next region can make by name. The Commerce Review Queue is now an architecture that persists into the next administration. The FSB framework is now language that a credit analyst at a regional bank can use to ask her counterparty for disclosure that her predecessors had no vocabulary to request. Every transformation has a breaking point. A surge can blow the circuits that it enters or trip the breakers that teach the whole system how to carry the next load. Yesterday was the breakers tripping in 4 different jurisdictions in the same week by people who just discovered that they had statutory authority all along and now have the templates to use it. We'll see you tomorrow.